Okay, welcome to the Salisbury Forum. We're very happy you're with us tonight. We have some terrific speakers lined up for the next few months, so we hope you'll mark your calendars and join us. On Friday, August 21st, Kurt Anderson will be speaking for us. He's a longtime journalist and 20-year veteran of the Public Radio International program Studio 360. He'll be discussing his new book, Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America, A Recent History. It's a sequel to his best-selling book, Fantasyland, How America Went Haywire, a 500-year history. It explored how, beginning with the Pilgrim era, America has attracted people willing to embrace unprovable facts and how that has evolved into our current culture. For this event, he will be interviewed by Jim Kelly, former editor of Time magazine. On Thursday, October 1st, Casper de Kyle will be speaking to us about how the impact of the decline of some of our traditional institutions, which have often provided a sense of community and connection for people, has inspired new ways for people to find and create meaningful community. This is particularly relevant during this time of social isolation and loneliness for many people. On Friday, November 20th, Adam Gopnik, longtime staff writer for The New Yorker and a very popular past speaker for the forum, will be discussing our election results. If you're new to the forum and want to be informed about our future programs, please go to our website at salisburyforum.org and sign up to join our email list. As always, we're very thankful for the Hotchkiss School and Salisbury School's continued support of our programs. That said, we depend on donations from our audience to cover the bulk of our expenses so we can continue to offer these free programs. We're extremely grateful for any and all donations. You're always welcome to mail us a check, or if you prefer, there's a donation button on the Salisbury Forum's homepage for an easy online donation. After the talk, there'll be two very short polling questions that will pop up on your screen. As soon as you answer them, we'll proceed to the Q&A period, so please stay with us. Your video will be turned off during this talk and your microphone will be muted. In the top right-hand corner of your screen, please set your screen to speaker view. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see an icon for chat and another icon for Q&A. We'd love to know where you live. So if you have a moment during the webinar, we would appreciate it if you could go to the chat room and type in your town and state. If you'd like to ask our speaker a question, however, please click on the Q&A to write down your question. I'll be reading your questions to Mr. Rhoden after his talk. We're very pleased to have William Rhoden with us tonight. After graduating from Morgan State University as an English major, he worked for the Afro-American Times, the Baltimore Sun, and eventually Ebony. He then became an award-winning columnist for the New York Times, where he worked for nearly 35 years, including 26 consecutive years writing the Sports of the Times column. He's currently editor-at-large for the ESPN website, The Undefeated, which is the premier platform for exploring the intersections of race, sports, and culture. He's director of the Rhoden Fellows Initiative, which is a training program for the next generation of sports journalists from historically Black colleges and universities. It was established as part of the Undefeated's mission to develop new voices and serve as an incubator for future multicultural journalists. In 2006, he published his first book, The $40 Million Slaves, Rise and Fall and Redemption of the Black Athlete. It's an original and perceptive analysis of the racist history and current reality of professional sports in the United States. One of the reviews state, it's an explosive and absorbing discussion of race, politics, and the history of American sports. And it also happens to get a great review on Amazon. His most recent book is City Game, Basketball in New York. Coming up in 2022 will be the Crowd Goes Wild, How to Love Sports Without Losing Your Soul. If you'd like to purchase any of these books, you can go to the Oblong Books and Music website or click on their link on the Salisbury Forum's homepage. So with that, I am very pleased to introduce William Rhoden. There you
Boom. There we are. Always touch and go. Hey, Mary, thank you very much. Yeah, people, we just spent the last half hour, for these Zoom calls, as good as they've been, they're like quite exhausting. It's been a brave new world. So Mary, thank you very much for the introduction. I'd also like to thank the board of directors of the Salisbury Forum for having me tonight. There's so much to unpack, and I'd also like to thank our IT person for being so patient and so helpful for getting us on board. I really look forward to the time when we could all be in the same room, so we could actually see each other and interact with each other. But for now, just a couple things. The first thing I'd like to do is just extend best wishes for everybody who is tuning into this. I know that some of you have lost people to COVID at this time, and maybe some of you couldn't grieve properly. So for anyone who has lost somebody or who's dealing with taking care of somebody who's stricken with COVID, just my best goes out to you. And for those of you who don't think this thing is real, it's real. Take caution and be careful. The second person I'd like to acknowledge is Kyle Dudley. Kyle Dudley is my nephew, but he's the head basketball coach at the Salisbury School. He's also the head tennis coach at the Salisbury School. And he has been my connection to Salisbury. I've been up there a couple times to speak to. He also teaches history at the Salisbury School. And it's actually through that relationship that I'm here. And the reason I mentioned Kyle is that he really has renewed my faith in the concept of the student athlete. It's sort of a faith that has been waning. As Mary said, I've been in this business for quite a long time for pay, beginning with the Afro-American newspaper in Baltimore. It was my first job in 1973 when I came on the clock and started getting paid for this stuff. And my mentor was the legendary Sam Lacey. And after Ebony, I went to, after the Afro-American, I went to Ebony Magazine, another Black-owned publication. And then after that, I made the journey to the world of white journalism when I went to the Baltimore Sun. And I stayed there for 4 years. I was basically a jazz critic and a jazz columnist. And then I made my journey to the New York Times, where I did 1 year in the Week in Review, and then went to sports. And beginning in 1990, I began writing the Sports of the Times column, and was very fortunate. I resigned from the Times, and I went to The Undefeated. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with ESPN's The Undefeated, but it is absolutely a tremendous website. A lot of great young writers. One writer, Soraya McDonald, was a finalist for the Pulitzer in criticism, dramatic criticism. And we just have wonderful young Black writers. Although it's run by, obviously ESPN Disney, it's the management is Black. Kevin Barretta is executive editor, and Raina Kelly and Monique Jones, so it's just been a great extension of my career. And I'll probably touch on this a little later about cutting my teeth in Black-owned publications, Black-owned and Black-run publications, which is so very important for young people. A lot of young people never, yeah, a lot of young Black journalists never really get the opportunity to be in a space that is, you know, operated by Black people, for Black people, run by Black people. You get to see, and this is one of the, you know, great things about going to an HBCU, because, you know, we spend most of our time, most African American young people are going to spend most of their time being the minority, you know, being one of many in their prep schools, in their high schools, you know, one of many, one of a few in prep schools, one of a few in high school, one of a few when they go to college. Many of our kids really never know what it's like to hear a real lion roar, you know, because they're always sort of in the minority, quote unquote. And one of the great things about having, you know, gone to Morgan, grown up on the South Side of Chicago, you know, worked at the Afro, worked at Ebony, is that it gave me such a strong sense of self, you know, seeing a Sam Lacey, seeing, you know, the Francis Murphy, the publisher of the Afro, knowing that history of generationals about talking to the Black press. You know, we had that conversation the other day. I mean, the wonderful thing about the Black press is that in the white press, particularly for the longest time, and to some extent now, Black folks didn't really exist. They didn't have birthdays. They didn't have weddings. They didn't have funerals. They basically were just objects of either ridicule or, you know, suspicion. So the Black press has been very strong. And Black institutions, I'm really a big believer and proponent of Black institutions. So working with the Undefeated has been very special. But again, I sort of went on the first of many diversions, but I wanted to just acknowledge Kyle for really giving me, reinforcing my, or not reinforcing my faith, reinvigorating my faith in the concept of the efficacy of the student athlete, and particularly the Black student athlete. You know, Kyle has been a scholar, and he really believes in this whole confluence of the mind, the body, the spirit. And he drills it to the students at the Salisbury School. He teaches the sometimes unpleasant truth of our country, the unpleasant history of our country. And so I just want to express my thanks to Kyle for not letting me descend into cynicism, because one of the things that's happened to a lot of our kids, you know, and again, I'll touch on this a little later, that have sort of been gobbled up by the athletic system in this country, has been that this idea of being connected to your neighborhood, your community, being connected to Black history, being connected to issues affecting your Black community, for the longest time were cut off. A lot of these kids were cut off from their communities, from their roots. Something I talk about in $40 Million Slaves, that one of the really unfortunate things that happened for a long time was young Black talent athletes, this rich oil was being mined and taken from the Black community, put to these different campuses, or these predominantly white campuses. And for the time they were there and making money for these campuses, they were taught that they were, well, different. They were different from the other Black students. You know, you're really not part of that. And many of them were coddled and protected, and they were really disconnected. And what's been really great about, I'd say, the last few years, maybe since Trayvon Martin, is that there's been a new sort of tipping point of young Black athletes coming into their own. One of the athletes I think really exemplifies that, and I'm going to click on this, is this young lady. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the wonderful Maya Moore. Maya Moore, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you know, Maya Moore was nominated or selected by Sports Illustrated a number of years ago as being one of the greatest winners of all times in college. That includes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's probably one of the greatest winners of all times. But Maya Moore was a star at University of Connecticut. She was the anchor of teams that won back-to-back championships. But the greatest championship that Maya Moore has won, I mean, that's, you know, the trophies are nice and the titles are nice. And I think that there was a time when a lot of our kids, a lot of young black kids, black athletes at these factory schools, that became the key thing, is holding the gold, you know, winning the medal, winning the games, enriching their coaches, enriching their schools. But Maya was very special. She's cut from a different kind of cloth. And in this era of activism, and I think to a lot of people, activism simply means going on Twitter and tweeting something out. That's sort of a substitute as activism. But Maya Moore did something that was really special. As I said, you know, she was a All-America at Connecticut. She went to Minnesota and just took over, dominated the WNBA. She led the Lynx to four titles, maybe 5 titles, WNBA titles. But the thing she did that was so special, and I don't talk enough. I have not spoken enough about Maya Moore, and I sort of plead guilty to that. Admired her, but not have sung her praises enough. You know, we talk about Colin Kaepernick, who I'll talk about later, but you know what Maya Moore did in 2019. She stunned the basketball world when she basically walked away from the game at the age of 29. She was 29 at the very top of her game, and she walked away from the game. But basically, she walked away from women's basketball and a great career to save someone's life. You know, we talk about social justice and the importance of social justice, but one of the thing that Maya Moore did that got everybody's attention, and had we not been so sexist as a sports media, had a man did what she did, a man of her stature did what she did. And LeBron James walked away from the game. Had, you know, Carmelo Anthony, had Kyrie Irving, had Kevin Durant, walked away from the game in their prime and said, you know, there's something more important than this. I've got to save somebody's life. I talk about social justice, but I'm going to live it. And she lived it. There was a young man named Jonathan Irons who was convicted of a crime in 1998 and sentenced to serve up to 50 years in prison. 50 years. And obviously this is something, when you talk about social justice, and to some extent it's just become another word. You know, that happens too much in our society, where we latch on to things and it just becomes a word that's commodified, that's commercialized. You know, even like Black Lives Matter was for a minute, you know, until the world saw the execution of George Floyd and some other, you know. But she quit at the top of her game. And, you know, another great athlete quit at the top of his game, Jim Brown. And, you know, we laud Jim Brown for leaving professional football at the age of 29, at the top of his game. And everybody was just flabbergasted. Well, how could you do that? And he left for a lot of other reasons. He didn't leave to you know, free somebody. He left to pursue an acting career. And his owner, quote unquote, his owner at the time, Art Modell, had demanded that Jim Brown come to training camp like all the other players. And Brown was over in London, you know, doing a film with Raquel Welch. and I think it's the Dirty Dozen, I believe. And Jim Brown, Art Modell summoned Jim Brown back to training camp, and Jim Brown responded by holding a press conference and said, "I quit," and that stunned everybody too. Fast forward to 2019, Maya Moore quits, to get the kind of fanfare because the WNBA doesn't get the same kind of fanfare. But she walked away and it stunned people because she said, "I believe in social justice. And although that's a huge term, here's my lane. My lane is this one man, Jonathan Irons, okay? You can only do what you can do." And I'm a big believer in that. You can only kind of do what you can do. You could be in your lane. You could dominate your lane, whatever that lane is. My lane is trying to put more young Black journalists from HBCUs in the journalism pipeline. And, ESPN and the Undefeated agreed, and we formed something. We put, money where our mouths are, and we have we started a fellowship for young, talented Black journalists, and we're on our 4th class. Well, Maya Moore, same thing, at another level. She said, "I'm going to dedicate my time and my energy to social justice and getting Jonathan Irons justice." And it worked. Last March, and I think it sort of was overshadowed a little bit because we were all struggling with understanding the COVID was very serious. Last March, Jonathan Irons' conviction was overturned. It was overturned, and July 1st, he was released. He was released from prison. I mean, think about that. If we were in person, I would like everybody just to give her a big hand. Think about that. I mean, the magnitude of that, of a player at her magnitude, everything she's accomplished, and then finally having the commitment to say, you know what, this basketball thing, and this is kind of instructive, this basketball thing is taking up too much of my time. It's too much of a diversion. I'm quitting. And you see the fruits of it. She's not playing this year, and we may have seen the last of Maya Moore on a basketball court, because I think that she's accomplished so much: Olympic gold medals, undefeated Connecticut teams. But I think that you step back and her religion. She's an evangelical Christian, very committed to her faith, and dedicated to Black people, Black causes, and this cause of social justice. And I can only imagine, of all the victories, and this is a lesson to young people, particularly young Black kids, of all the victories, of all the trophies that you have lifted, predominantly for these white institutions, by the way, and white coaches with these multi-million-dollar salaries. You think back on it, how many Black kids have you helped? You've helped your white coaches, you've helped white institutions, but how many Black young men and women have you really helped? Have you really lifted up? And for Maya Moore to actually rescue somebody, a young person who's kind of around her age, to rescue somebody from the jaws of prison life, and to give them a new lease on life, is just an amazing accomplishment. I have so much respect for, and I have a lot of respect for, and I'm not sure if everybody saw that. Did I share my screen? I'm not sure if everybody saw Maya Moore. But anyway, I went on and on. I'm not sure. In case you did not see Maya Moore, this is who she is and what she looks like. Again, this is the great Maya Moore. Anyway, Maya's decided that she probably is not going to play anymore, and it kind of leads into my sort of the next point of this about sports as a distraction. I think Maya stepped back and she realized what a diversion, as good as sports was for her. I think she realized that sports was a diversion, that although it did some great things for her and it gave her a platform, I think that she also realized that, man, if I was just solely focused on social justice earlier, what more could I have done? Maybe I could have run for, Congress or something. And that's why, in a way, that I'm sad to see sports come back. And I guess I've got to explain that. Obviously, I work for the Undefeated, which is owned by ESPN, which is owned by Disney, and sports is our business. Sports is our game, and so obviously there's a business interest of people wanting to see sports come back. But I really lament sports coming back, because as a nation, without sports, we were just so intensely focused on a lot of painful truths and realities about our country. We skipped over March Madness. I was actually in Kansas City on March 11th, 12th, and I call it the day that sports shut down. I was at the first day. This is Wednesday. I was at the Big 12. I see. Yeah, I was at the first day of the Big 12 tournament, and this was going to be the beginning of March Madness. But even then, just one technical note. Yeah, I realized I didn't share my screen when I was talking about Maya Moore. I'll probably do it at the very end, but I had her picture up and I was talking about her and raving about her, and I was looking at her picture, but I didn't share the screen, so none of you did it. But I'll do it at the very end just so you all can see it. And I've got some more images, and this time I will share it. But just sort of complete that thought, I was really, this idea of sports coming back. I was in Kansas City Wednesday, I think March 11th, and although people sort of were getting a little concerned about COVID, we weren't really taking it seriously. And I was sitting in the commissioner's box at the Big East, Bob Bowlesby, who was a commissioner. And they actually played a full slate of games on Wednesday with the idea that, well, okay, Wednesday we'll play, but Thursday we'll play, but we won't have any fans there, or we'll just have, close relatives, that kind of stuff. And Bob left the room and he came back and he showed me a text. He had gotten a text from the NCAA, and the text said the NBA has suspended the season. And I thought it was a joke. And he said, no, look, they suspended the season because 2 players tested positive for COVID. And I think that's when, at least in the sports realm, a lot of people began to take this thing really seriously. And by the end of Wednesday, the Big 8, the Big 12 canceled the rest of the tournament. The Ivy League had canceled their tournament maybe a couple days before. In a rapid succession, everybody canceled their seasons. And I think from that point on, number one, a couple of things happened. I think a lot of people who thought that sports was an essential worker, that sports was essential, were astounded by how easily and quickly sports were unplugged. Just like that, no March Madness. First time it had been interrupted in decades. Excuse me. No March Madness. No NBA season. Just like that. It was taken away just like that overnight. And I was thinking that should operate on a couple of levels, to especially, a lot of young Black kids who think that it's their birthright. It's their birthright to play in the NBA. It's their birthright to get these scholarships to Alabama and Mississippi, you know. And this, hopefully, you can step back and think, you know, brother, this could be taken away from you real quick. You know, there are a lot of people aren't necessarily, I mean, we talk about how the NBA is, you know, 78, 80% of black players, not 78% black as in the totality of the industry, 70 to 80% black players. The NFL, 67 to 70% black players, not the industry. The industry is almost like 97, 98% white owned, white control. And when you don't own anything, whether it's your apartment or anything else, it can be taken from you quickly, more quickly than you think. So I think that this was one of a number of sobering things to a lot of people, how quickly sports can disappear. And what I have really come to, although the disease has been just ravishing communities, you know, it's been ravishing community. A lot of people have lost a lot of people. And I think there's still some idiots who think this is a joke. There's still some fools who think that this is some kind of hoax. It's not a hoax. This is real, but you know, you live and you will learn. But, and particularly being at a place like the Undefeated, this has been such March, April, May, June. I think we've done some of our greatest work. I may have written some of my greatest columns because we're unfettered and uninterrupted with games. You know, and I think a lot of people realize in my industry, in the sports industry, how lazy we had become because we had basically become so reliant on the games. You know, the games drove our coverage. You know, we'd have our programs based around games and talking about things which in retrospect seem so foolish. You know, seem so stupid. You know, who scored what team's going to win first, who, you know, and hopefully, and I think a lot of athletes, although that's their income is coming from this, I think these past 4 months, from everything from spending time with their families to seeing people who they know and love get sick. And then not only that, looking back and looking at some really serious issues about health and then disparities, this whole idea, and I think this has become sort of the watchword and cornerstone, at least for me, of our messaging from here on out is the wealth and income gap that's become so apparent, particularly with the African-American community. The wealth and income gap. I think one thing that this has done, I mean, we always knew that there was wealth in America. You know, we always knew that there was, you know, there was people who didn't have and people had. But I think with this, I think we realize the magnitude, the expanse of wealth and ultra wealth in this country. And what that means in terms of who gets care, who can shelter in place. Just like there are people who during the Depression who maybe felt it a little bit, but there are people during this COVID who haven't really felt the cold because they could shelter in place on one of 3 houses on 3 different continents, who could shelter in place on their yachts. You know, we saw the NFL draft, and I think that's another place where that was very eye-opening. The NFL was forced to do a draft, not having the predominantly white coaches in war rooms in some building in the stadium, but they were doing it from their homes. And oh my God, people were seeing how deliciously these coaches, there's a white coach after white coach, white executive after white executive, white owner after white owner in these spectacular houses, you know, and then, you know, you may have 3 black coaches, but otherwise it was this whole white, you know, wave of power structure selecting these mostly black kids. And then the stories they told about the black kids fit into this disturbing narrative: blood on the hall, blood on the walls, piss in the halls, kind of thing. One awful story after the next. Not the uplifting stories of all these people who are kind of made it, had great families and all that, but just one awful story. Not awful in that these people weren't deserving, but fitting into this black labor, white wealth dynamic. And I think that woke a lot of people up. The NFL draft woke a lot of people up of this whole disparity that exists in the sports culture. So, and not to mention that this year, last year, 2019, we had the 1619 project. Nicole Hannah Jones, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist from the New York Times. And it was so great for the Times and for Nicole to shepherded this 1619 project because during the pandemic, because it forced all of us and a lot of our white brothers and sisters to look at the truth of slavery, not the myth of slavery, that a lot of people just in years, 1619, this happened. No, but the day-to-day horror, the day-to-day misery, the day-to-day rape, the day-to-day death, flogging, murder that began in 1619 and continues to this day. I think for a lot of people, they never really saw the linkage of why 1619 is linked to 2020. How George Floyd's death, the death of all these people being murdered by a police state that was basically invented to subjugate poor people and black people, how there's a uninterrupted link between 1619 and 2019. And I think for those people saying, that happened a long time ago. No, it's as if it happened yesterday. And the sports industry is a mere microcosm of that. And I think that being able, it's been I don't call it a joy necessarily, but it has been wonderful to see this history just unfold in March, April, May, June, uninterrupted by March Madness, uninterrupted by the NBA playoffs, by baseball news, football news. I think it's been wonderful to see, and I go back to what I said before, that I'm really, it saddens me in a way that we're going back to games, because all of a sudden I'm listening to this stuff again. I'm tuning in to MLB baseball, serious football. And everybody is now talking about balls and strikes. Meanwhile, we've got federal troops being sent to selected cities. We've got COVID deaths increasing and going on, being recorded by daily. And an administration. And I'd vote independently, by the way. So this is not I'm not raising the flag for a particular party. I'm just raising the flag for freedom and democracy. Period. That's what I'm interested in. So we continue having free forums like this without having, stormtroopers in the back of the auditorium monitoring who says what. But at the time when we've got a huge election coming up and voter suppression is going to be on the table as it's never been on the table before. At a time when all these things are happening, we're going back to talking about balls and strikes and how many rebounds does LeBron James get tonight? And can the Pelicans beat the Lakers? And that kind of foolishness. And I do appreciate a few players like Kyrie Irving saying, here we are in this bubble, metaphorically and real. We're in this bubble while all hell is breaking loose around it, where we can be out there. To LeBron James's credit, he started an initiative, a voter registration initiative to get young people to register to vote, and also to work with other agencies to help ward off the voter suppression that we know is coming. So again, I appreciate the diversion. One of the things that, it's interesting, I was watching a couple of games, and I'm going to share my screen now, try to get this right. I was looking at this. This is Thursday when the baseball resumed, and this was the Nationals team. Hopefully everybody could see this now. The Nationals played the Yankees, and they started off, everybody knelt before the national anthem, by the way, and they knelt, and it was nice pageantry. I don't want to denigrate it. It was gallant pageantry. They knelt and they held this black cloth, and there was a really wonderful talk. Morgan Freeman gave a nice talk, and then when it was all over, then everybody stood up and they played the national anthem. Well, that defeats the whole point. When this is Kaepernick, of course, now this was kneeling during the national anthem, and that's protest. I mean, when somebody gives you permission to protest, it's not protest anymore. It's now sanctioned, like I said, pageantry, and it's a feel good moment. Baseball. They had. Let me stop sharing. Baseball painted something on the field and all that, and that's all well and good. But the proof of the pie is in the pudding. Baseball has an awful diversity problem when it comes to African Americans in baseball. If you walk through the halls of Major League Baseball, if you walk through the halls of the National Football League, if you walk through the halls of many of the NBA teams, you walk through their legal departments, their marketing departments of each team, you'll be stunned with how white it is and how devoid of black people it is. So, you could, make these pronouncements about Black Lives Matter, and you could do all the pageantry and the gestures, but how much business does your team do with black vendors? How many blacks do you have in the C-suite, in the executive suite? Spare me the gestures are okay, but this is about power and control and closing the wealth and income gap. That's all this is about. Power, control, closing the wealth and income gap. I'm going to probably pause for a minute, stop for a minute, because I know we've got questions. But the point is that activism is not a spectator sport, as Maya Moore showed. You could tweet and quote unquote speak out, but it's about what are you doing in your lane? What's your lane, and are you dominating that lane? If you're a football player, basketball player, NBA, your lane is, making sure your organization and your league is not segregated. that is creating a lot of opportunities for black folks in your organization, and that they're doing a lot of business with black accounting firms, black law firms, that they're doing business with black vendors. That's, when you do that, you're telling me that Black lives matter, the totality of black lives. So, just, kind of wrapping this up, black, athletes can be a very powerful force for change. I've seen it. Again, I'll just share my screen again. We've seen it. We've seen it with, Muhammad Ali, a tremendous force for change. He refused. He was at the top of his game. He refused to be drafted at a time when a lot of young people, black and white, were opposing the draft. And he risked his crown, he risked his championship. He stepped away to protest and to go against the federal government. Same thing with Smith and Carlos. They basically, this is 1968, the Summer Games, when they won the silver and gold medal, and they used the podium to protest. And remember, this is 1968. So this stuff has been going on for a long time. And I'm optimistic in one sense that, we've got young, people, oh, isn't it great that we've got a lot of young white kids out in the street? Yeah, that's fine. But I remember in 1968, a lot of flower children were in the street too. And now, a lot of those people who are in their late 60s, 70s are part of the problem, who at some point, decided that they were going to be white, that the privilege, it was just too much to resist, And so I'm optimistic in a way, but I'm also saying, we'll see. So, we shall see. But again, I want to turn this over back to, I know we've got questions and hopefully some answers to this. But again, if I leave you with anything, it's just that activism is not a spectator sport. And are we in a moment or is this a movement? I won't tell you which way I vote. All I'll tell you is that we shall see. We'll see. I'd like to turn this over to Mary for questions, but again, I look forward to the point where we can all be together, but let's make the best of this. Am I waiting for somebody? Hello, hello?
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I was waiting for Troy in the background to make me live. So thank you, Bill, very much for your talk. We're going to have a couple of poll questions just pop up. If you will answer them, it will only take a moment, and then we're going to move into the Q&A. And please, for anyone who has a question, please to send in the Q&A, click on the Q&A link at the very bottom of your screen and write in whatever question you may have. So I see we're getting some responses now on where you live, which is great. And unsurprisingly, the majority of people are living in Litchfield County. And how you heard about this, this forum, again, in the majority from the Salisbury Forum email and also word of mouth. So please, the email is a great way to keep in touch with us and to learn what's coming up. So please sign up for our email list if you haven't done so already. And we're just going to give people a few more moments to respond. And then I will move on to the questions. Okay, so I think that should do it for the poll. So the first question, hopefully that poll screen will disappear sometime soon. And so, all right, so the first question I've gotten is, as a former Division I athlete who almost lost his scholarship for leaving school during the indoor track season for civil rights demonstrations in the South, I'm acutely aware of the pressures placed on student athletes to stay in good standing and keep their scholarships. With the college football season upon us, if it actually happens, what protections, if any, can collegiate athletes expect to have if they demonstrate their support of Black Lives Matter and related issues on the field this fall? And of course, what protection will they have if they choose not to play due to COVID-19? This is a question from Frank Handelman.
Yeah, it's a great question, Frank. I think the only protection that college athletes have, particularly because they're at the whim of the scholarship, is collective action. You know, you see how in Mississippi, it was largely because of the Mississippi State football and basketball players who basically said they were not, if something was not done about that flag, they probably would not play. And then the NCAA weighed in because of that. And they said that if Mississippi did not do something about that Confederate symbol, then there would be no championships held in Mississippi. So I think the lesson of all this is collective action. You got a lot of coaches like Gundy at Oklahoma State, Dabo Swinney at Clemson, and they're bullies. But the only way that these athletes can protect themselves, and I think they'd be nuts to play, frankly, is for collective action. It just can't be three saying we're going to play. Everybody has to say we're not playing. Then that's what you call protection. It's a protection of a group. But I think barring that, those coaches like Nick Saban, Dabo, these guys are bullies, and they know that these guys want to play in the NFL, so they bully. So to answer your question, I think the answer is in safety, that in numbers. It's got to be collective action. There must be collective action.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is a question from Gary. Is it a good idea for the NFL to carry out its announced plan to play the Black National Anthem along with the Star-Spangled Banner prior to the start of every opening day game this season?
Well, again, that's another good question. I mean, that's fine, but that's tinsel. That's part of the pageantry. I remember I went to Morgan State, and at HBCUs, we always played the Black National Anthem first. I thought that everybody did that. We played the Black National Anthem first, then we played the national anthem. But, I think that's fine. But again, I'm more interested in, how are we going to close the wealth and income gap? If you're the NFL, keep the, I'd rather not play any anthem at all. I'd rather just do away with the playing of any anthem. Let's just go play. But if I'm the NFL team, how much business do we do with Black vendors? That's, let's get into real things. How many Black attorneys do we have in all our teams? How many Black presidents do we have? Like 2. How many Black let's get your anthem is not going to put more Black athletes, Black people in positions of power and control. So, I think the pageantry.
Okay, what steps would you recommend to alter and adjust the white power structure and culture? This is a question from Joe Lloyd.
Well, again, it gets back to, that's a great question because, you don't have any Black ownership, significant Black ownership. You got Michael Jordan and the NBA, NFL. No, so there has to be pressure. And I think the pressure has to come from players. I've been on some calls about this issue. And I said, well, until high profile athletes get involved in this and put pressure on their quote unquote, the owners, it's not going to change. So all this is about pressure from 16, 19, and there's been no change without pressure. You see the Washington football team change their name. Why? Because of economic pressure. Nike threatened to pull a FedEx. So nothing that we're talking about, whether it's women's rights to the vote, which we'll celebrate, next in August, about pressure. Answer your question, high-profile athletes, Black and white, have to put pressure on their franchises to begin to promote, African Americans to the C-suite and the coaching, not just coaching, but to the executive suites as well. Pressure.
Okay. What are the main goals of the organization called Black Lives Matter? And in your opinion, do those goals align with the most important needs of African Americans?
I couldn't tell you, yeah, I'm not fluent in Black Lives Matter, except I support the organization. I think the name is implicit. You know, Black Lives Matter. Um, you know, red lives matter. Asian lives matter. It's just that you cannot live in a country. You cannot live in a country where a policeman stares at the camera while he crushes the life out of an unarmed person. You know, you can't live in a country where a man is run down in Georgia and by vigilantes and gunned down in broad daylight. You know, I don't know, you know, we can't make this really too complex. No matter whether you're white, black, or indifferent, you cannot live in a country with that sort of inhumanity, because if not, you're next. You know, so I can't tell you, I can't read the Constitution of Black Lives Matter, except to say that Black Lives Matter. That is not what we've seen in the last few months, few years. Trayvon Martin, I mean, these things are not acceptable.
All right, this is a question from Matthew Fava. He's the Suffield Academy boys varsity basketball coach. And he's asking, what do you suggest our high school level student athletes do to help move the needle in the right direction regarding systemic racism and racial injustice? What can they do to cope with everything going on and feel a sense of safety and agency? How should they enact change?
You should make sure, and I can't want to go back to this last, but you know, we talk about this stuff. If you're in one of these schools, you know, these schools, whether it's a prep school, and you have no black folks on your staff, you're part of the problem. Or one, or two, you know, you're part of the problem. If you are part of any organization that has no black folks, you go in these meetings, these boardrooms, there are no black folks of any significant number, you are part of the problem. And your mission, if you believe in this, is to speak up and do something about it. You know, to me, it's not that complicated. You know, it's not that complicated. If you are in some of these elite schools, whether it's, you know, and they're like no black faculty or one black, you know, you say, we've got a problem. And it's up to each person to say, we got to fix this. Or you say, you know what? We don't have a problem. I'm comfortable with it, and come get me. You know, it's either or. You see a problem, you know, fix it. You know, we said the same thing with women. If you're in a room, there are no women, you fix it. You got a problem. You know, that's a problem. It's not really complicated. It's just courage. It's just courage. You know, you can't make this stuff more complicated than it is. What do you think about that?
Here's another question from Jonathan Sip. Would paying college athletes do anything to address the underlying issues of inequality?
I don't think so. I think that if you're like one of the Power 5 schools, you know, the Alabamas of the world, I think that you just have to establish a trust fund, a trust for athletes. You take a percentage of the bowl games, of the Final Four, and put it in a trust for the athlete. And I'd say when they graduate, maybe when their 4 years are up or whatever, then they now are entitled to this money that's accrued while they were there. I think that more than just paying individual, it's almost like, you know, you play with us, we get in the bowl game, you'll get a percentage of it, and we'll put it in a trust. And when you graduate or when you leave here after or 4 years are up, you have access to this money. I'm more in favor of that. And yeah, I'm more in favor of that. I actually, not just paying individual athletes. I'm more in favor of the trust, establishing a trust.
Okay, thank you. Here's from Frank Fitzmaurice. Bill, do you agree that MLB should not have restarted this week?
I you know, as I said earlier, I wish that there wasn't baseball at all. You know, although now my own hypocrisy, I did just sign up for MLB.com to see some baseball. But just because of my professional obligations, I've got to like tune in and see what's going on. But, again, the issue, I think, is that money has become the highest value in our society. I'm not just saying it just started in 2016. I think it's blossomed. But I think so when money is the highest value in your society, everything is done for money, not for health or for anything else. It's done for money. A lot of the things that corporations do, if this Black Lives Matter stuff, is because of money. They're looking at the bottom line. And if we could do some good, that's fine. So to answer your question, man, I just really enjoy, that's not the right word, but these 4 months where the nation was just so focused on these issues and the history and our history. And, to me, it was unprecedented. And I'm sort of sad to see, baseball come in, not just, baseball, basketball, football, because we're going to be having these meaningless conversations about balls and strikes. Who gives a damn, so.
It's an interesting comment to say after spending your whole life focused on sports. But all right.
Wait a minute, Mary. Wait. That was great. but although I didn't spend most of my career covering balls and strikes. I mean, right. Most of my career has been, but great point. But most of my career, and you should have said, and you work for a corporation that's like the worldwide leader in sports. What do you say?
So here's a question from Jeremy Feigelson. What future do you see for Colin Kaepernick?
I think he's got a great, not going to be in the NFL as a quarterback. But I think that he's got he's just signed a great production deal with Disney. He's with Nike. And there'd be a lot of people like Tommy Smith-Johnson. There'd be a lot of people who protested in the past who would love to have, So anyway, I think his future looks very promising. I think he's going to be really involved in social justice issues. He's got a great production company. So I think that outside of football is fine. I don't think that we'll see him on a football field. And frankly, I can't speak for Colin. I don't know if I think he's outgrown that. I think that was a phase in his life that he did. Now he's outgrown. He's outgrown the National Football League. Honestly, I think.
Okay, so all right. This is a question from Noel Roman. Should top athletes be steered to HBCUs or historical Black colleges and universities, since a lot of the top programs are more concerned keeping their boosters and local businesses happy?
That's a great question. I'd rather see them steered to Black coaches, because again, it gets back to the person earlier who talked about what could college athletes do. I think if you have enough Black college athletes who say, I want to play for a Black coach, I think that you're going to find out, because what's going on in big time college football and basketball to an extent is terrible, with Black people being used for the muscle, but not being recycled as head coaches, athletic directors. And I think if you start to see star Black athletes say, I want to play for a Black coach, I think that probably is as powerful. I think going to an HBCU is fine. Going to an HBCU is not for everybody. It's not for everybody. Some people want the bright lights and the big city, and the field stands, although now we're not going to be having field stands anytime soon. I love the HBCU experience. I think it would be great. I'd like to see a lot of stars going to HBCUs, but practically, I'd much prefer, I'd equally prefer star Black athletes begin to say, listen, I'm going somewhere where there's Black head coaches. And I think that's a powerful statement.
Okay, so maybe we'll just do one more question here. Here's another question, I think, from Matthew Fava. what can the high school student athletes do?
To do what? I mean, what?
Well, I think it steps back to his previous question. He's the high school coach. What can they do to help move the needle in the right direction regarding systemic racism and racial injustice, but then also what can they do to cope with everything going on and feel a sense of safety and agency?
I don't know that's. I'll ask you. Is that a question? Is that a concern of the high school athlete, or is that a concern of the administration, the adults who surround
I
it?
guess on this is maybe this coach is seeing maybe the stress and anxiety among his student athletes, you know, in terms of safety and agency, and if they want to in some way.
Safety in what way?
How do they deal with the issue that we're living in right now as a high school student athlete? How do they cope with this? And what should they do?
That's $1 million. That's $1 million question. Ask some adults, how are we coping with it? You know, I mean, I think, you know, I'm trying to, how was I when I was 16 years old? I mean, we're 16. How would we be dealing with this? And, you know, if you can imagine what you were like 16, 17, sometimes the world was exploding around. You didn't care. I mean, you were like thinking like the date and the movie and the dance and the, you know, I really think it's how can adults make them feel comfortable? Listen to them. If they decide to kneel, let them kneel. You know, just don't suffocate them. I think don't smother them.
In that sense.
Yeah, that's why. As adults, we don't suffocate your young people.
So, all right. Well, I think that should tie it up. So I want to thank you so much again for coming and speaking with us. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your point of view. I think, you know, I'm very impressed by this whole program that you're working with at ESPN to support young Black journalists. Hopefully that will help, you know, in everything moving forward to create more opportunity. So that's a wonderful contribution, I think, that you're making there. And in addition to all those many, many years of writing, you know, for the Times and other publications. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great, and I could hear people. I could hear, you know, people. I feel their spirit.
I wish we were all live, and as we normally have been traditionally, and we'd be applauding, you know, like crazy for you. I really wish, you know, hopefully without too much more time, we'll get back to our live talks. But in the meantime, you know, the webinar is the best we can do.
Hey,
so
you've been doing a great job.
And dealing with it and the screen share and all the rest of the stuff that's not so easy to cope with. Yeah. Anyway, so we wish you an excellent weekend. And thank you everyone who has joined us tonight. We hope you will join us at our future webinars, and we look forward to being in touch. So bye now.
Take care.